Sweden, the land of the lowest smoking rates by far in all of Europe. So low that this year, in 2023, it is set to become, according to official criteria, smoke-free. It's a goal that the EU has asked its member states to achieve by 2040. Most are on track to miss this target, but Sweden will smash it by a staggering 17 years. The country's smoking rate just 15 years ago was more than 150% higher than it is today. The Swedes have shown us the way to be safer and healthier, just like they did when they not only invented the 3-point seatbelt, but donated it to every car manufacturer in the world for free. The seatbelt has saved well over 1 million lives since a Volvo engineer came up with the idea in 1959. Sweden's latest public health miracle could save 3.5 million lives in the next decade if we accept their latest gift to global public health. You see, the Swedes have now effectively wiped out cigarette smoking by developing a specific policy formula that makes alternatives more accessible, more acceptable, and more affordable than cigarettes to consumers. The results speak for themselves. Swedes have long used education, tobacco control measures and snus to keep smoking rates down. With the introduction of modern tobacco-free alternatives, vaping in 2015, and next-generation nicotine pouches, which followed in 2018, turbocharged the smoking decline. In the last decade, smoking rates in Sweden have fallen by an astonishing 55%. The rest of the EU's smoking rates are, on average, 5 times higher than Sweden's, because they have a less supportive policy approach to cigarette alternatives. Compared to the rest of the European Union, Sweden has 44% fewer tobacco-related deaths, a cancer rate that is 41% lower, and 38% fewer deaths attributable to any cancer. If every other country in the EU followed Sweden's example, up to 3.5 million European early deaths would be prevented in just 1 decade. World-renowned public health experts agree.
I think we have the answer already. Tell the world about the Swedish experience and the mixture of pros and cons that we have had that have been helping people to leave cigarettes and get into something else. It's important for the governments to tell the consumers that if you need your daily nicotine, use this instead of the cigarettes.
And this is Sweden's gift to global public health, and why the message to the world when it comes to smoking is quit like Sweden. Smoke-free Sweden 2023.
Well, a hearty welcome to you all, and thank you for joining our forum this morning to discuss Sweden and the incredible achievement of Sweden of approaching a smoke-free status. My name is Delon Human. I'm a physician. I'm a long-time tobacco control advocate, and in the privileged position to be colleagues and friends with 3 of the giants in tobacco control over the last decades. And Professor Marewa Glover will be joining us online. I'll just quickly go through our program. We have a large online group attending this forum. So we have a video and some slides that we just want to show to provide the context for our meeting today. And then our panel discussion with Karl, Konstantinos, Anders, and Marewa will unpack what's actually happening in Sweden, which in many ways is like the best kept secret in public health. So that's why we want the forum, is to make sure that the rest of the world understands what Sweden is busy achieving. I just want to introduce you to our panel. Firstly, Anders Milton, who's a physician with extensive experience in tobacco control, and he's a social leader in Sweden, it's fair to say. He's led on public health matters, social matters in Sweden over many decades, and thank you so much, Anders, for joining us. Professor Karl Fagerström, our Swedish giant in oral nicotine especially. Many consider him to be the father of oral nicotine pouches, a researcher over many decades. And we are grateful that he is willing to share his experience and expertise. Then we have Dr. Marewa Glover, who is calling in from New Zealand. She's also been a giant in tobacco control, and especially in making tobacco control accessible to the minority groups and specifically the indigenous groups in New Zealand. So we will have Marewa online, and then we have Dr. Konstantinos Farsalinos, very well known in tobacco harm reduction, a cardiologist, the most cited researcher in tobacco harm reduction, and an expert in nicotine itself. So Konstantinos, thank you so much for coming all the way from sunny Greece to sunny Sweden to share your to share your experience with us. So just to give you the context of why we are here and why you have received this report on smoke-free Sweden, and this is just the first part of an analysis of what's happened in Sweden, is number one,
Sweden,
Sweden is becoming smoke-free. Now, in global health, we've used the raw definition of 5% smoking prevalences going smoke-free. And Sweden is one of the first countries to actually achieve that. We see that as a huge public health achievement, and in a way, it's like a gift to the world, very much like the COVID pandemic that we've just gone through, where the vaccines were also seen as a gift. And today is to start unpacking the learnings from becoming smoke-free in Sweden. This graph summarizes basically what's happening between the EU and Sweden. Most EU countries have targeted 2040 as their goal to go tobacco-free or smoke-free. And you'll see that Sweden has, in many ways, already achieved that this year, which is 17 years in advance of the others. If you also look at the smoke-free trend in Sweden, where it's now at 5.6% of the adult population smoking, whereas in the rest of the EU, the average smoking prevalence is still 23%, still a quarter of population smoking. So one has to ask the question, how did the Swedes do it? And why is this not being shouted from the mouth, the whole hilltops, that this is a fantastic public health achievement? In most EU countries, you'll find that at least 1 in 3 people are still smoking cigarettes. So it's the most damaging, the most risky delivery system of nicotine. So what have the benefits that have been derived from the Swedish tobacco control model? At least every year, 3 to 3.4 thousand lives are saved because there's a prevention and control of combustible tobacco-related disease. And we know that those who smoke cigarettes, 1 out of 2 smokers of cigarettes will eventually die because of tobacco-related disease. So if the EU had followed Sweden's example, we would have had so many lives saved. By some researchers in Sweden and abroad, at least 2.84 million lives could have been saved if the Swedish model had been followed. You would also see that compared to the rest of the EU, there are so many less, 44% fewer tobacco-related deaths, especially cancers. If you look at the cancers, that really tells a story. 41% lower cancer rates, and you have 38% less deaths by cancer. All of these slides will be made available on a website. We started a website so that this is completely open source, and its intent is to start the debate, get the conversation going on Sweden. If you also look at the number of smokers between the EU and Sweden, it's quite clear that there is a huge decrease in the number of cigarette smokers in Sweden. And then if you look at the type of delivery systems, the smoke-free delivery systems that have been used in Sweden, where in the early days it was mostly snus, you'll see that over the last 10 years, vaping products and oral nicotine pouches without tobacco have been used by Sweden to go smoke-free. So how can we help other countries to quit like Sweden. Two main messages is number one, education. See what's worked here and see if it can be replicated elsewhere. And always in complementing and in addition to standard tobacco control measures. I think Sweden has been a signatory to the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, and it's been an excellent exponent of this. And we would push both of them to show how Sweden has gone smoke-free. One last point on the products that have been made available in Sweden. It's too easy to say what it was all about snus in the early days of the Swedish tobacco control model. But in fact, what Sweden did was they embraced harm reduction as part of tobacco control, and they made available, accessible, and affordable those non-combustible or smoke-free products so that adult smokers of cigarettes could switch. So you would find that nicotine pouches, vapes, and even heated tobacco has played a role in that. It's also shown that it's really important for consumers to actually be attracted to these, because for those consumers who cannot or will not quit tobacco, they want something that they enjoy. And this seems to have been the message in Sweden that has been executed. So even in terms of the taxation, you will find that the Swedish government have adopted the risk continuum of these products. So the most harmful products are taxed more, the least harmful are taxed less. And that has helped the consumer to make the transition. And I want to repeat again, it's for those consumers who cannot or will not quit. That's always been the gold standard, and that will remain the gold standard in tobacco control. But for those consumers who cannot quit. Wrapping up before we ask our panel for their insights is, so the smoke-free society in Sweden, how did that come about? Number one, consumers were given a choice, and the policymakers actually allowed for the transition from combustible smoked cigarettes to smoke-free products. There was some form of education of the difference. It made possible for consumers to have acceptable, accessible, and affordable products that they could switch to. And it's something that we dare other countries to emulate, that which is based on sound evidence. And the Swedish experience is something that can help other countries. And we would hope that they would look at Sweden's public policy. They would look at the fundamental differentiation between smoke-free and smoked, the access to these smoke-free products, and the educational resources that have been made available. And that's been the Swedish way, is becoming smoke-free with less harmful alternatives. With that, we will now move to our panel discussion. And I would ask Jessica Perkins, co-moderator, to start off with the questions.
So I'll start with Anders. Hi, Anders. It's really great to have you here with us today. So as a physician and social leader in Sweden, what would you regard as the key regulatory intervention Sweden has used to achieve a smoke-free status?
I'm not sure if I should give the government the right to decide this, because I think it's basically the consumers. More than the government as such. I mean, the public health agencies in Sweden are all following the World Health Organization line. Anything with tobacco is wrong, because snus creates a dependency, and dependencies are wrong. Now, for the ones of us that do not want people to die prematurely, as smokers do, as Delon said, we want people to switch from something which will kill them to something that they can live with. In Sweden, we have snus, and they can live with that. And they can live till old age, and they won't get cancer. And as we have shown in a number of brochures, and I think that you cited from that, Dylan, it doesn't cause cancer. You know, it might not be, you might not want to kiss somebody with snus, but it doesn't cause cancer, and you can live with it. So I think people have chosen they've found a way which we have in Sweden that you don't have in other European Union countries, and they have opted for that rather than smoking. So I think it's simple as that. If you give people the choice.
Karl, if I could ask you, you've been part of this journey for many decades, and especially in the early days, it was perhaps quite a challenge to persuade policymakers to understand the role of a smoke-free product vis-a-vis cigarettes. As a researcher and as a tobacco control leader, how did you do it?
How did Sweden do it? Yes. I think I would like to start as far back as saying that Sweden was not part of any of the two world wars, which meant that smoking among men never went up as high in Sweden as in the countries that went to war and where cigarettes were freely and widely distributed. And that also meant that the old habit of using snus prevailed in some small pockets of the society. It was usually among farmers, miners, loggers. And then in 1964, we start to know that tobacco is smoking cigarettes is causing lung cancer. The Swedish government reacted very quickly to set up a clearinghouse to inform about the harms of smoking. And we have a tobacco company at that time, and tobacco monopoly, I mean, it was a monopoly. And I do remember an ad which they put out was that because there was also this non-smokers concerns that I don't want to be exposed to your smoke. So the company monopoly advertised that there are ways to enjoy tobacco without bothering others. And there was the student radicalism in the end of the 70s and 80s, and they wanted to look and behave like real farmers. So they also took up snus a little bit. And I think that was some of the reasons that snus did not become extinct, but rather had a revival. And there was also a finance minister in the government that was exposed to arguments from the health minister that now when we know that smoking is so harmful, we need to increase the tax on tobacco. And the finance minister said, not on snus. My constituency, because it was coming from a very farm characterized land and voters to him. Not my constituency, my workers, they need to have something that they can be stimulated from and enjoy. So there was actually hiking up on cigarettes, but on snus. Later, that became more leveled off. This is not to say that the society at large was always behind or helping the development. I remember when I started out my interest here, I was a psychologist, I was a clinician, I saw smokers, I helped them. And of course, the majority you couldn't help. And with one patient particularly, they tried everything in and out. I wrote a letter to the Director General of the Public Health Institute. In such a case, could I recommend snus as a harm reduction? The answer I got back was, under no circumstances could you do that. So I think there is a bit of a story, and there is actually a little bit more to that also. Sweden is the nicotine country in the world, and by that I mean nicotine replacement was also invented in Sweden. Still, most of the nicotine replacement in the world is manufactured in Sweden. Nicotine pouches, the last ones, were developed in Sweden. And when snus was becoming normal, the cans being on the tables, etc., we should also know that Sweden had the highest penetration of nicotine replacement products, particularly the gum. So there were gum blisters and snus cans on the table, and that was kind of normal. and cigarette became less normal. So that was thanks what I had.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Marewa?
So Marewa's next.
Welcome, Marewa.
Hi, Marewa. Really great to see you again. So you have been a champion for harm reduction in New Zealand, and you especially deserve credit for your efforts to include Indigenous people and minority groups in public health. Some would say that to exclude adult smokers from smoke-free alternatives, if they cannot or will not quit smoking, actually amounts to discrimination. What can be learned from the Swedish example, and how can it be used in other parts of the world?
Thank you for having me as part of your important panel. And what I was starting to say was that we did want to quit like Sweden, and we did try. My mentor, Dr. Mari Logerson, lobbied for the acceptance of snus here, for it to be imported for sale. And then he started End Smoking NZ, and I joined that and became the chair and was chair for many years. We lobbied for that, and there was this belief in New Zealand that Swedish snus was illegal. And it wasn't until much later, when the heated tobacco products were introduced and that was taken to court, that we found out that a district court here at least said, no, the law only is specific to products that can be chewed. So chewing tobacco was illegal, but you don't chew snus. So it seemed that snus actually could have been imported and sold here legally for all that time that we'd lobbied for it. And then we had a law change, and they made sure that Swedish snus and oral nicotine tobacco products and oral tobacco products were absolutely banned for sale and import, sale and distribution in New Zealand. So that was very disappointing. So what we did get, it was the heated tobacco products that was challenged by the Ministry of Health in court. And as I said, the district court said, no, they're not illegal under the Act. And why would you ban something that contributes to the whole purpose of the law, which was to reduce smoking prevalence and especially the harm from smoking? So we have heated tobacco products. However, there's no advertising allowed, so very few people know about those. And we no longer have oral nicotine pouches. They were sold for a little while, and then they were banned in the vaping regulation. And we had vaping introduced here around about, or some people began vaping before 2015, but it really took off after that point. So in terms of New Zealand, if I just add, we're not far behind you. The average smoking prevalence now, daily smoking prevalence is about 8%. And we could get to 5%, well, for most of the population. The New Zealand Europeans, who are the numerically dominant and politically dominant group, already at around 10. But unfortunately, the Indigenous people, Māori, are probably very similar to where Portugal and Belgium are in the EU at the moment. Has rapidly come down in the last 10 years, though, with the corresponding rise in vaping.
Marewa, thank you so much, and especially for staying awake in New Zealand to join us at this breakfast forum in Sweden. If we'll ask Konstantinos for his opening remarks, and then we'll have a panel discussion, if you wouldn't mind to stay on so that we could ask you some questions. Just one word on what Marewa has just said. It is heartening to see that there is a race going on to go smoke-free. And Sweden is leading that race, but New Zealand is not far behind. And to find out exactly what they have done with tobacco control and its new ways, its new harm reduction strategies to actually make true what the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control envisioned. It's also now a good moment to ask Konstantinos for his opening remarks. As I've mentioned, Konstantinos is remarkable in the sense that he was a smoker himself, And he's gone through the personal journey of trying to quit and then transitioning to combustion-free or smoke-free alternatives. And then he became a prodigious researcher. I think that his output was second to none, especially in the early years of the tobacco harm reduction revolution. So we pay respect to you, Konstantinos. And as you are here in Sweden, we'd like to hear what your insights are on Sweden. And then we'll have an open panel discussion with your questions.
Thank you, Delon. To be honest, I've literally tried everything before knowing and being informed about harm reduction products. Everything succeeded, but you understand that it succeeded for a very short period of time because I always relapsed. And that is one of the biggest problems with smoking cessation, the relapse rate, which is huge, especially in the first few months of an effort to quit. And what matters is the long-term smoking abstinence, not quitting for a couple of months, 3 months, 5 months, and then relapsing back and starting all over again. So to someone with no particular involvement in this field, it's not really hard and it's not very scientific. You don't need a lot of scientific knowledge to understand the big difference between smoking and all other harm reduction products. Of course, there is a risk continuum, as we say, between products, but we all understand and we know it for decades that smoking kills people because you are combusting, you are burning organic matter, and it wouldn't matter if it's tobacco or something else. The problem with smoking is that you are combusting something at 800 degrees Celsius when a smoker takes a puff, and you understand what kind of chemicals are being created through this combustion process. So it's quite reasonable to understand that if you avoid combustion, then you are avoiding the vast majority of these harmful chemicals. And I will agree with both Anders and Karl that what happened in Sweden was mainly consumer-driven, probably because there was a tradition here. And it was consumer-driven to reduce not nicotine use, but smoking. And this is something we need to understand. I don't know if the slide that I prepared is available, we can show it, because it is important that while we are discussing about the smoking rates that have gone so down in Sweden, that Sweden is now becoming free. This is not the case when you look at nicotine use. And these are data from the Eurobarometer 2020 survey, which is performed by the European Commission every couple of years. And at that time, the smoking rate in Sweden was very, very low compared to the rest of the European Union. So it's 6.4% in 2020 versus 23.5% in the rest of the European Union. But when you look at nicotine intake, Sweden is not different from the rest of the European Union. It's almost identical. So they managed to be smoke-free by substituting for cigarettes, using other products, other nicotine-containing products instead of cigarettes. They did not eliminate nicotine use. Is that important? Well, if you look at the death rates from cardiovascular disease, from lung cancer, from cancer in other organs, it's so low that it is perfectly clear that what matters is the left side of the bar chart, not the right side of the bar chart. Because if smoking and nicotine were equivalent, then you would have similar rates of smoking-related disease and death. But no, this is not happening. So I think this is a key message in order to understand that our enemy is smoking. It's not necessarily nicotine. Of course, we're not advocating nicotine use to anyone, but who is the enemy? The enemy is smoking. The enemy is using combustible tobacco products, whether it's cigarettes, cigars, pipe, whatever else you combust tobacco. This is the enemy. And the Swedish consumers have managed to realize and understand the difference. So they have maintained basically nicotine intake at quite a high level, similar to the rest of Europe, but they're not taking nicotine through smoking. And this is the big difference between Sweden and the rest of the European Union, where the vast majority of nicotine intake is through smoking. And I think that this is the message we can send, yes, ideally you should quit everything, don't use anything, but look at this case study of Sweden, a country which has not eliminated nicotine use, it has eliminated smoking, and that's a public health benefit for the population.
Fantastic. I think this slide, if you could just, this will also be made available, but the fact that Konstantinos has pointed out that the total nicotine intake in Sweden is not dissimilar to the total nicotine intake in other EU countries. It's the delivery system that changed, and that has been allowed to be, the smoke or combustible cigarette has been allowed to be supplanted, replaced by smoke-free products. And that's a key message. If I may ask for Marewa to come back on. So we'll start with our panel discussion now. And Anders, if I could start with a Swedish question to you first. So the rest of the world know the Swedes as humble, very slow to do a victory lap, but very much, if you look at no, I mean, most of us live in parts of the world where we have IKEA and we've built IKEA furniture, and Ingvar Kamprad probably democratized furniture in the rest of the world. It's a Swedish invention. Seatbelts and Volvo, the same story. And in a sense, what we see here is a democratization of tobacco control in Sweden. Now, why do the Swedes get these things right, and why don't they go on a victory lap to celebrate this?
Well, and I think the reason is that the public health agencies are following the World Health Organization rules, as it were. Anything related to tobacco consumption or consumption of nicotine is bad, regardless if it kills you or doesn't kill you. I mean, that's the official standpoint of the activist. What is the difference between those activists and myself? Well, the reason is that I don't want people to die prematurely. If we can save them, I think we should. There are 1 billion smokers in the world. 500 million of them will die due to smoking. And if we can help them by getting nicotine in a safer way, I think we should. I mean, I think that's my duty as a doctor, to help people. And I think that in Sweden, we are in a position where the people really have chosen. I mean, it's not as much authorities. Authorities have accepted it. But when Sweden had a referendum to become members of the European Union in 1994, the Swedish negotiators had made snus a part. You know, it was allowed in Sweden, but forbidden in the rest of the European Union. Otherwise, I think Swedish people would have voted no. It was 52-48. And I think they would have been, reverse side. So I think it's important to the Swedish health, to the Swedish image, and to the Swedish consumers to have snus. We have snus. The rest of Europe doesn't. So you have to find other ways of getting in consumption in a way, consumption of nicotine in a way that doesn't kill you.
Thank you, Anders. And please, we invite our online audience, if they have any questions, to send it in. And Jessica will put the questions to the panel. Konstantinos.
And then adding to what Anders has just said. It seems that for some organizations, the fight against smoking, which in reality is a fight against tobacco and against nicotine, appears to be more of a moral battle, discussing about ethics and judging behaviors, rather than a public health battle, which, as Anders said, and we are both physicians, is about health, disease, and death. So it seems that all the fight has been focused on the moral aspect of a behavior of using a substance, nicotine, or using tobacco in any form, instead of looking at smoking-related disease, smoking-related death, and whether nicotine intake through other forms of either tobacco or even non-tobacco products is associated with such disease and death. Well, the answer is very clear. We know for 40 years that it's not nicotine that kills smokers. And the issue is that as public health experts and as organizations involved in public health, is it important to discuss about the moral aspect of a behavior or to discuss about health harm? I think the answer is obvious. It's a rhetorical question. But no one needs to think about the answer. It's not our job to judge the behavior of anyone. And we're not, philosophers involved in a debate about the ethics of behavior in a society. We are here to discuss about health harms, health risks, improvement in health risk, improvement in health. And by the way, the WHO, which I agree with Anders, is following a very hard negative line concerning harm reduction, has also created the Ottawa Charter on Health Promotion, which says that people should have the right tools and the proper information in order to improve their own health and take their health in their hands.
Yes.
And they are not allowed to do that because they are constantly being influenced by a communication bombardment concerning the ethics of using nicotine, the ethics and the moral aspects of using any tobacco product without discussing the harms, and especially the relative harms, because we are addressing this information to people who already smoke, which means that they are already using the most lethal form of nicotine intake.
Konstantinos, that's an excellent segue into asking Marewa, who's been so instrumental in helping to empower consumers. So Marewa, you heard both Anders and Karl mentioning that consumers led the drive in Sweden to make available to them the information and eventually the smoke-free products that helped Sweden to come to this point where they are almost smoke-free. You've tried to do exactly the same in New Zealand. Are there any lessons in consumer empowerment that you can identify for other countries, both in Sweden and New Zealand, and what can other countries do to actually get the consumer voice heard, please?
Thank you. It's definitely consumers have played an important role, as have some harm reduction advocates who are academics, researchers, and we have had some people on the inside of the Ministry of Health who listen to the research, listen to consumers, and listen to the harm reduction advocates who are also academics and researchers, and they weighed it up. And some of them, not all, and they changed jobs a lot, but the ones that focused, as Konstantinos was saying, on reducing the disease and the deaths, they could not ban this. It was clear that the consumers wanted to move to this. They were moving in large numbers, and then the evidence has just continued to come out, backing up the early adopters who took up vaping, and also those academics and researchers who looked at all of this, the research, the basic science, all of us here and others who said, yep, this could do it. And to be fair, we were late to the table. Consumers picked up vaping, consumers innovated and improved the product, and they began to set up vape shops. They began to set themselves up as manufacturers. It really was a groundswell, consumer-driven innovation, starting with Honlik, but then people who smoked all around the world got into the vaping industry. It wasn't the tobacco companies. They were even later than some of us academics and researchers who listened to the consumers and who sat for hours listening to them, listening to their stories, listening to them tell us about their health has improved, that they can hike again, they can go hiking. So it was all of us working together, talking together, and strategizing together. So I think that's a very important lesson.
Thank you, Marewa. I especially enjoyed your point on the individual health benefits. Too often in tobacco control, the individual health benefits are underestimated. So an individual smoker who decides to either switch to a smoke-free or to quit, and the immediate health benefit to that individual, that's mostly underplayed. And it would be good if population health and individual health both recognized the harm reduction and harm reversal that could happen at an individual health level. Anders, and then I have a question for Karl, please.
May I just say that I think it's important that the health authorities tell people the truth.
Yeah.
I mean, we should tell people what really matters. I think the British are a good example of that. I mean, of telling. If people come to the doctor and they cannot stop smoking with the help that the medical profession can give, then they are told to, it's better if you use e-cigarettes. Not that e-cigarettes are without danger, but they are much less dangerous than smoking cigarettes. I would like, in Sweden, the authorities to say to people that if you cannot stop smoking with the help that healthcare can give you, try something else. Try something which we have in Sweden, snus. And tell people the real story. Because today, I mean, even if you talk in this country, if you ask people, average, if you ask them about the health risks with snus contra cigarettes, I mean, 50% do not know the difference, really. I mean, in this country. So, I mean, with all respect, I mean, it's very important that the authorities tells things as it is.
Thank you, Anders. Karl, just moving on to your statement that you made earlier, that Sweden is in many ways, the nicotine capital of the world. Like the US has Silicon Valley, Sweden has a nicotine valley, and that this was the origin for most of the nicotine replacement therapies. So a very important question is, if the Swedish model is not pursued, what is the alternative? And most of us have been in tobacco control for many years. And the official WHO policy is to encourage all of their member states, their individual health practitioners, to get their adult smokers to quit. And they quit by using nicotine replacement therapy, psychosocial therapy or psychosocial support. And you basically want smokers just to quit. And in many cases, we say you either quit or you die. And it seems like such a wonderful opportunity is lost, that the smoke-free nicotine alternatives are not openly, as Anders has now said, openly discussed and openly propagated for those adult smokers who cannot or will not quit. So Karl, you've been here from the beginning when nicotine started. Why do you think that the proposed quitting method is not working, and why in Sweden it has worked to actually make available a range of smoke-free nicotine alternatives?
When we come, then I think I need to point at two physicians from the University of Lund. They were actually the inventors of nicotine replacement. These were two lung physicians, and they were interested in studying lungs under a different atmospheric pressure. So they went to submarine crews where smoking was forbidden for safety reasons, and they saw that some actually used snus, 20-year-old boys, which was not very normal. It was old loggers, miners, and farmers. So why do you use snus? Yeah, we are not allowed to smoke. Aha. These doctors smoke themselves, and then Herevka. Maybe if one could give them nicotine instead in a safer form instead of smoking, that could be a smoking cessation method. So these doctors wrote a letter to a Swedish pharmaceutical company, where the research director was a heavy smoker and had a wife that hated his smoking. Yeah? So this is all the important things you see that picks up. That was the other thing that needs to be mentioned, I think, is also the Karolinska Institute's interest in the harmful effects of tobacco, where they actually found out whether they liked it or not, or whether they looked for it really. But the result was that the nicotine per se, as we had heard, was not that harmful, not leading to an increased risk of stroke or myocardial infarction or cancer. Maybe if you had an infarction or a stroke, the consequences would be a little bit more severe if you were using snus. So that laid the foundation that we could understand that if we do not burn the nicotine and tobacco, there is a different ball game. What will happen here? It has been mentioned, and I wholeheartedly agree, this is a moral issue for many. It's a very moral issue. And I think many believe in a drug-free society. We don't need any tobacco at all. We don't need nicotine, of course. So there will be a fight to eradicate nicotine and tobacco. And in some time, we will have countries where they have banned all alternatives to nicotine. And we will have some countries that has been open to alternatives of nicotine. And we will be able to see not only the prevalences of smoking, but we will also be able to see what is more important than the prevalence of smoking. That is how the harms it is causing, of course. We are not usually so interested in the dependence effect producing effects of caffeine, since it isn't that harmful. So why does it really matter? So I think this moral issue will be at some time, 15, 20, 25 years in the future, it be evident where we see that the epidemiology between different countries is so huge that everyone will agree that we have to do something, and we don't live in a paradise and a completely drug-free world.
Thank you for that pragmatic statement, Karl. Some questions from online and from the audience. Please, sir, just your name and then just who of the panelists you would like to address, please.
Yes, my name is Frederick Linden. I'm from My Data Sweden, a not-for-profit organization dealing in data rather than, so we can be anywhere. My question is, if we take this great example now of Sweden and we couple that to the implementation of ICD-11 and a healthcare protocol to really get to this problem. You, Karl, you said you can prescribe snus. They wouldn't let you. But if we really take this seriously and do a systematic approach somewhere between consumer and patient, because I think this is where we meet, or the markets meet. And we need the healthcare professionals to make sure to help out in finding a good direction for any patient to, improve quality or DALI or whatever end result we're looking at. But if we take the opportunity of ICD-11 and this fact that we're so close to achieving it, do you think that's a possibility to explore?
Karl and Konstantinos.
This is very important, but what you need to do, and I think this should be the norm, is to have a very accurate recording of the patterns of smoking and other nicotine product use status of consumers, of patients. Usually, we're not seeing a very careful recording of these behavioral patterns among healthcare professionals. They don't pay a lot of attention to smoking, despite being the norm to write if someone is a smoker or not. Saying that, yes, I smoke, or no, I don't smoke is not enough. You need to look at the duration of smoking, the consumption of smoking, because they both play a role in smoking-related disease. We know that smoking-related disease does not happen shortly after smoking initiation, it takes years. We know that people who quit smoking still have a much higher risk of smoking-related disease for a long period of time, from 5-10 years for cardiovascular disease and up to 15 years for cancer. So unless we have a very accurate recording of current and past smoking and nicotine use status, it's going to be very difficult to exploit this data and have meaningful results. So I always advise people that they should record all patterns of nicotine use in the most accurate way, including frequency of consumption and amount of consumption, of course, meaning duration, number of cigarettes or other products. So this is very important, especially for data analytics companies. That's crucial because it's not as simple as recording, are you a smoker? Yes, no. That's not enough.
Karl, if you wanted to add to that, and if as you take the microphone, just for our audience, the ICD-10 is the International Classification of Disease. 11. International Classification of Disease, and a way in which member states of the WHO use to classify the disease that are, amongst others, tobacco related, and the need to be absolutely precise. And as you know, there has been some really big mistakes made over the last couple of years. If you take the EVALI, which was a misnomer, it had nothing to do with vaping products at all, but was still in a way linked to a disease of the lung. So your point is well taken and well appreciated. Thank you. Karl, if you wanted to add.
No, I'm afraid I wasn't very good in distilling the question to me there. Can you repeat it, please?
So taking the opportunity that we're looking at the Swedish smoke-free, being smoke-free now, sorry. Taking the opportunity of the good stats currently and the good understanding of what we can and should not do, connecting that to the implementation, a good implementation of ICD-11, and connecting that to healthcare protocols to improve outcomes or whatever we're measuring. Should we, is ICD-11 as it's currently denominated or put out there around the area of nicotine use, is it well formulated, and should we connect that to the current?
I'm not a physician, so I can say that I don't believe this is a thing in the relationship between the consumer and the physician. The smokers don't see themselves as physicians. They don't normally go to physicians for help, and also the classifications of the disorder. Of course, you have to do it for each patient. You have to, this is important data in the health record. But when it comes to change the habits of the population from smoking to something else, this is much more consumer driven and relatively independent of ICD-11 or any other classification system. Thanks.
May I just say that I mean, obviously, as you know from the statistics, Sweden has the lowest incidence of lung cancer in the European Union. Apart from the fact that we use tobacco or nicotine in the same way as the rest of Europe, as Konstantinos showed. Now, we have the lowest incidence of lung cancer in Europe. Do the Swedish health authorities bring that forward? No, because that would mean that snus, as we use today, is not dangerous. Do they want to show that? No.
And Anders, what about
again? I mean, I think it's important to state that we should demand from the authorities that run us, that we vote for, that they tell us the truth.
But does this apply to all the smoke-free products and alternatives in Sweden?
Well, I mean,
is there the same kind of opposition to making that known?
In effect, yes. I mean, unfortunately, the health authorities, there are three, basically, with different agendas as well. They are all the same in the sense that they do not they admit, of course, the statistics. I mean, no statistics. Open data. It's nothing secret. It's World Health Organization. It's European Union. It's everything. It's there. They just don't want people to notice it, because then they have to say that, well, as a matter of fact, you don't get cancer by not using cigarettes. It might not be good for you. It might not be what you like your partner to do, but it doesn't give you cancer. It doesn't shorten your life. Do they want to tell? No, they don't want to tell that.
Karl, and then Konstantinos, and we have an online question for you, Marewa.
There is a little bit a glimpse of a hope, maybe. We got a new government last October or so. And there has been some signs that this government looks upon the things a little different than the previous governments. But so far, we haven't seen any transfer down into the agencies yet. But there is a glimpse of hope.
Konstantinos, you agree?
What you mentioned about ICD-11 is pretty okay for the epidemiological assessment of the association between different nicotine products use and developing of disease. But as Karl said, to drive society into a switch from smoking to other products, they don't consider this, as a medical intervention. Switching to a lower risk nicotine product is considered by smokers a lifestyle change, not a medical treatment, not even a medical problem that needs to be treated. And that's why, and it's not only Sweden, it's been happening globally. That's why people, smokers, are not very willing to go to a physician and be prescribed medications. That's a global phenomenon. That's happening even in countries where all the expenses are being fully subsidized by the state. For example, in the UK, you can have free access to a smoking cessation center. You can even get medications for free, but people don't want to go there because they consider smoking not a disease, as the WHO has classified it, but as a bad lifestyle choice, a bad habit, and they need to change their lifestyle, change their way of life in order to make a switch to a different product. They don't consider it a disease that needs to be treated by a physician. That's why, from an epidemiological perspective, looking at the associations between products and disease, yes, it's fine, but not as something that is going to provide motivation to the society to switch, and I mean the smoking society, unless the authorities are perfectly honest and communicate honestly all the findings instead of, admitting them but trying to hide them at the same time.
Please.
So it's a general question. So somebody's asking, is the Swedish module or example available for download to act as a guideline for other countries? So for the benefit of our audience, we are going to have a few assets available. So one is a very comprehensive and concise, high quality report about Sweden and a fact sheet amongst some other assets as well, which we're going to share on tobaccoharmreduction.net, and also the Smoke Free Sweden Twitter page and website, which will make that clear on our Twitter page where you can access those assets.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Jessica, because we'd like to have this as a start of a conversation. You've heard from both Karl and Anders that there's a huge public health achievement, but it's not being discussed as it should in Sweden or the EU or the rest of the world. And we need to start that conversation. What have the Swedes done right to go smoke free? Marewa, please.
Thank you. Just on the moral, focus that has been mentioned, as a professor of public health, I'm working in public health for 30 years. I just want to, and it's what, as an Indigenous person, it's kind of frustrating, the reductionist view, and we need a more holistic view. So there are many other diseases, there are many other causes of diseases and early death. And when you put up the figure at the beginning of this forum of how many people, how many lives could have been saved in those other countries, if tobacco control globally continues the focus and the path that they're going down, continues to lobby for only smoking and then now vaping and other risk-reduced products to be targeted, and continues to lobby government for funding for those, there is an opportunity cost. That money could be rediverted to the next, leading cause of preventable disease. So yes, smoking is significant, and it has been the leading preventable cause of disease in the world, but obesity is very close behind. And we really, along with the rest of the colleagues here, if we are focused on reducing disease, there are other diseases that need attention, and it really is what is causing harm. And you would look at that list and you would prioritize that. And yes, lung cancer, yes, cardiovascular, really this endemic of obesity is going to pip smoking, and tobacco control, the billions of dollars pouring into focusing on trying to get people to stop using nicotine via risk-reduced products, where there is, if you looked at the diseases from those, you'd be going, okay, we now need to shift our focus to this other leading cause of preventable disease.
Thank you, Marewa. So Marewa has made the very valid point that non-communicable disease, which the WHO states is responsible for 63% of morbidity and mortality figures worldwide. And the big four are diabetes, heart, lung disease, and then tobacco-related problems with cancer. So those big diseases basically kill the majority of people worldwide. And that a pragmatic and balanced approach to prevent and control these non-communicable diseases would be key. But we know obviously that tobacco, and specifically cigarettes, they are linked to 80% of the NCDs. So that's why this is a good place to start, that as part of a balanced portfolio of public health measures. We are privileged to have some consumer leaders here. So Thomas, your question, please. Thomas, and then we have Atakan Befrits as well. Just your name and then the question, please, Thomas.
Hello, I'm Thomas Hammargren. We've been talking about education and the importance of education in this space. So my question maybe to you, Anders, is how to get this pamphlet into every Swedish embassy around the world. It's something they should be proud of.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a good time to use the leverage of how we treated the pandemic,
yes,
which was really criticized early days, and now we're starting to get some credit for it. So that was how to get about it. And the other thought I had was, maybe it should be in every IKEA. Ingvar Kamprad was a big snus user, and and he even opened up for the IKEA in Japan to sell snus. So he's not there anymore, but that could be another route for information.
Thank you for that question. Anders, how can we get this in all the Swedish embassies?
I think it might even be more important if you got it to all the IKEAs. And I think we should try that. I think we really should try that.
Yeah.
Because as you know, Europe beats cancer. There's a big fight against cancer in Europe. And we have written to them from the Snus Commission in Sweden. We have written to them saying that if people were to smoke and use snus, as in Sweden, 355,000 per year fewer would die in the European Union due to smoking. It's simple. So yes, I think that we have again, using ordinary open statistics and putting it together, we can see that it does help if you use something else than cigarettes. And I think it's a very good idea that we should try to get to the IKEAs and to the embassies.
Karl, you wanted to add to that?
No, nothing more. That I was stepping up here, and we have a little report from the Snus Commission, which I think is interesting for most of you that haven't seen it already. It's about the relative health risks of tobacco and nicotine products. Thanks.
Thank you. We have a question from Atakan, please. Benji.
So Atakan Befferts from Swedish Civil Society. I had two, one short one and a longer one. The first one is basically in Sweden, we have larger civil societies like the Cancer Foundation, Lung Heart Foundation, but also patient organizations like Lungcancerfonden Stödet, for example, they represent stage 4 lung cancer patients, multiple myocardial infarction patients, and they refuse to even discuss the possibility of endorsing, even in some cases, reduced risk products of whatever kind to their patients. And to us, that's just insane, basically. And that's a question for the Swedish panel, if they think there's something we can do about that, start in that end, because they are powerful and they are, like we are, rights holders for better products, better care, or lower, best attainable standard of mental and physical health.
Do you want to include your second question as well?
Too long.
Okay, so this is a key question. We know that health professionals and health professional associations are key in endorsing the view to patients and consumers of what products are more harmful, what products are less harmful, especially for those consumers who cannot quit. So Anders, I'd like to hear your view. How can we get them to understand and propagate proper science and policy?
I think it's an uphill battle. On the other hand, the present president of the Cancer Union in Sweden was he was Minister of Health in a government earlier. And at that time, as a Minister of Health, he wrote to the European Union saying that snus is a good thing compared to cigarettes. Now, the question we are asking him today is, does he feel the same way today? Because in that case, the Cancer Foundation will have to change its policies.
But Anders, just fair to say, so all the smoke-free category of products are available in Sweden today. So would you extend that to all the categories of smoke-free nicotine?
Well, yes, I think that if you use tobacco and you leave cigarettes and use something else, you're better off. Yeah. Much better off. And it's just that we have. I mean, people have been using snus for decades or 100 years, something like that. And there's a lot of research being done on snus, more than on, because you have used it longer time. So that's why we know more about that. But I mean, again, as you say, if people use something else than cigarettes, it's better.
Smoke-free nicotine alternatives, basically.
Obviously. And again, I think the British authorities, I mean, the British Public Health England, the Royal College of Physicians, etc., will then say that if you cannot stop smoking ordinary cigarettes with the help that you get from the healthcare, then you should move and choose something else. In their case, e-cigarettes.
I think we saw the experience in the UK, where initially most of scientists were against alternative nicotine products. And I'm talking about electronic cigarettes because that's what was available at that time in the UK. But what initiated the shift among the scientific community also in the UK was a couple of organizations, basically Public Health England and maybe the Royal College of Physicians, who wrote some reports and insisted that electronic cigarettes are by far less harmful than smoking. Initially, the British Medical Association and several scientific societies in the UK were also against electronic cigarettes. But over time and through the insistence from Public Health England and the Royal College of Physicians, they were convinced and they completely changed their stance. And they now support electronic cigarettes as an alternative to smoking for those who cannot or are not willing to quit with currently approved methods. Well, I think that this is the sparkle that that we need to find in other countries too. One or two organizations who will look at the evidence, create some reports, insist on them despite the criticism, because initially Public Health England also received a lot of criticism. And then I think we will gradually see a swift change. It's going to take time. I fully agree with Anders. A lot of time.
Thank you, Konstantinos. Another question, and then we'll wrap up and we'll ask each of the speakers just for their final remarks.
Thank you very much for an interesting discussion. Patrik Stromer, Swedish Association of Snus Manufacturers. We actually have 2 smoke-free generations in Sweden by now, the youngest population and the middle age 30 to 44. And how is this described in Swedish media? As a young female are using more white snus nicotine pouches. They are not reporting that we are basically smoke-free in Sweden today.
Mm-hmm.
So you're doing a great job here.
Thank you very much. Thomas, last question. Atakan, last question, and then we go to the panel.
Yes, something I've been a bit occupied with is that NRTs, medicinal nicotine, or then become that way with all the data, and they are deemed safe and effective. In Sweden, we have a nicotine pouch.
Yes.
As NRT, and maybe to you, Karl. How come that the now nicotine pouches directed to consumers are basically identical to a product that's by the authorities is considered safe and effective?
That's an important question. The safety profile of oral nicotine pouches are equivalent to nicotine replacement therapy. Your view?
Yes, my history is such that I started to work with developing nicotine replacement products. The first was gum in 1975. And did that for a good number of years, realizing that we were not harvesting the full potential. The products were not funny. In terms of flavorings, for example, very limited in terms of nicotine dose, which is not only because of the developing company, because if I may make a little detrack here, when we went to FDA in 1983 to get nicotine gum 2 and 4 milligram approved, the outcome was that 4 milligram will be over my dead body, said the director of the department. So the deal was then 2 milligram. So it wasn't easy to come with much stronger forms of nicotine products. Finally, I decided to quit working for the pharmaceutical company and starting my own company, Niconovum. It was called Two Stop first, actually. Then it was changed to Niconovum. Delon knows about this also. You were very interested at the time being. And I'm coming from a snus country. People using gum on the lozenge was complaining about the burning effects, and it didn't taste well, and something untoward things in the back of the throat, etc. Then I know that Swedes, when they put it up here, they can absorb good doses of nicotine. So why not develop a nicotine replacement form like that? It was never thought about as it could be consumer free until the tobacco directives where the e-cigarettes became free. Then the nicotine pouches can be free of prescription also. So again, but the dose was fairly low there also, 2 and 4 milligram, and the pouches that we see today are very similar in terms of ingredients. There is the nicotine carrier, which is usually some kind of crystalline. There is the pharma grade clean nicotine, bought from the same companies as the pharmaceutical companies buy it. There are some pH controlling ingredients, and there are flavorings. But thanks to the tobacco directive that went through the European Union with the e-cigarettes being approved, so also these products can be. And I don't think the e-cigarettes have gotten the decision and the ruling that they got had there not been e-cigarette users outside the parliament in Brussels.
Yes.
And I think consumer support groups can be extremely important, but we don't see them because don't know, do they feel ashamed or what is the trouble? But I think there is an untapped resource there.
We've come to the end of the session. Atakan, you had one more question, and perhaps it's fitting that a consumer leader has the last question, and then we ask the speakers to wrap up.
Okay, so Atakan Befrits again from Global Civil Society for Reduced Risk Products. We have just ascertained, and this could just as well have been nicotine pouches and not snus, but we have just ascertained that 27 private individuals in Italy have just been hit with a 30,000 euro fine for private imports of snus products from outside the EU. So the total weight for all 27 seizures was under 7 kilograms. And that equates to 27 times 30,000 euro in fines.
Okay.
And people who use these products are generally, from marginalized populations or young people. That is Turkish guy, one of them who's in university, he's going to have his future trashed.
Okay, Atakan, I think so. That's to the point of accessibility to smoke-free alternatives. I'd like to ask Marewa first, perhaps just to give her closing remarks now that we've gone through the Swedish model. Any last thoughts from you, please, Marewa?
Well, thank you. It's been an honor to join you to talk about this, and very exciting to see that you will be reaching 5% very soon. And I hope that New Zealand won't be too far behind. I wish that marginalized groups, especially the poorest people in New Zealand and Māori, who are still, as I said, sitting around the same level as Portugal and Belgium in the EU, well, they will be left behind. And as with our new law, things are going to get tougher. As Atakan was saying, people are going to be harmed by the policies that are being brought in now. The neo-prohibitionist policies will do more harm. The robberies, the black market is taking off in New Zealand. We are an island in the Pacific, large country, the size of Japan, and there's a lot of illicit tobacco coming in now. The cap on nicotine in products, in the smoked tobacco products, is going to lead to some, innovative ways that consumers will find to put nicotine back in. We really don't know, because that's going to be known as, I guess, the New Zealand experiment. But I don't think it's going to be as positive as the Swedish experiment has been. So I really wish that other countries would quit like Sweden and would take your lesson on board, allow people a wider range of risk-reduced nicotine products to use, and then we would have a chance of catching up much faster. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Marewa. Much appreciated to be with us this late hour, your time. Konstantinos, your last remarks, please.
As we've said, and I fully agree with both Anders and Karl, this has been a consumer-initiated and consumer-driven revolution, both in Sweden and in many other countries where harm reduction products have made an impact. But the big problem is, and the big issue is whether the authorities, whether it's the regulatory authorities, the politicians, or the public health and scientific authorities, allow the consumers to make this consumer-initiated revolution, or create hurdles to prevent them from doing that. And we've seen some countries which have created amazing hurdles in this drive, this switch to alternative products. For example, thankfully not Sweden, but for example, in India, basically low and middle income country, with a huge problem of not only smoking, but oral use of very harmful, very carcinogenic products. They have banned almost all alternative nicotine products, including electronic cigarettes and snus, while they allow the sales at a very, very low price of the most harmful forms of nicotine intake. And it's not only tobacco cigarettes, but also oral, very toxic products. It makes no sense. You understand, e-cigarettes were there, snus tried to enter the country, they were both thrown out. In Sweden, yes, the authorities, I agree, they don't endorse these alternative products, and they don't even want to advertise the miracle that is happening in Sweden, which is unique within the EU, becoming a smoke-free country. At least they haven't provided so many hurdles that they would eventually prevent this consumer-initiated revolution. We should at least allow the consumers to have the choices. I think that's very important. And being honest, not only as a regulatory authority, but also as a scientific community and scientific authorities and organizations is crucial. Building trust is based on honesty only. So we shouldn't hide this information, especially among smokers. Otherwise, we are indirectly discouraging them and preventing them from making choices that are going to be beneficial for their health.
Konstantinos, Anders, and then Karl.
Thank you. I think that we should try to get the authorities to say it as it is. You know, be honest with the statistics. And I think, Patrick, what you're telling about the female smoking, I mean, there's basically zero now, and they're using snus instead in this country. And I think we will try to make the Swedish government and the agencies proud of what we have achieved, rather than being ashamed, as it were. And I think we should make them proud, and we should make them announce it to the world that in this country, with the help that we have from our distant policies, we have succeeded in getting smoking down to the 5% level. And you should be proud of that, and we will help them.
Things have been so well said, so I can't improve on silence. In a few seconds, thanks.
Thank you, Karl. So I'd like to thank our four speakers for their tremendous insights and applaud Sweden for almost achieving what global public health has set as the mission statement, and that's to go smoke-free by 2040. And for Sweden to have already achieved a smoking prevalence of 5.6%, I think we should all sit up, take notice, be honest with all stakeholders, especially consumers. Know that, as we've heard, bans would lead to illicit trade and unregulated use of products. Whereas if we give the consumers and patients the right information, number one, as WHO has put it, the gold standard is still you want to empower and help consumers to quit smoking and nicotine altogether. That's the gold standard. But we know, as Karl put it, we don't live in a dream world. There are still 1.1 billion users of nicotine. But as we now have seen, in Sweden, nicotine use is on par with the rest of the EU. But somehow the Swedes have managed to give their consumers the choice to switch to smoke-free nicotine alternatives. And if you just look at the statistics, then really the argument is over. If you look at Sweden and you see the rate of cancers, if you see the rate of tobacco-related death, then there is no argument. And in our book, the world should sit up, take notice, learn, do research, and start the conversation so that this is not the best kept secret in public health, but that in fact Sweden is used as the case study and as the best practice in going smoke-free. We salute Sweden and all the Swedish people. We will be using your furniture, your motor vehicles, and hopefully in future we will also be using your tobacco control methods. Thank you very much for joining us for the session. We invite you to some coffee and snacks outside, and to speak to these wonderful panelists, and looking forward to continue this drive of smoke-free freedom. We remind you that there'll be a website, and all of these fact sheets, reports are there to have a conversation about. Thank you very much for coming.